Look at your family. How many uncles or aunts? How many cousins do you have? The answer to this question brings us crowded results. So what happened? Although we grew up in such large families, most of us have given up having children. The answer to this question is usually, when the economic conditions of the country are like this, I don't find it logical to have a child when the world is crazy, or I want to travel and gallivant, I can't deal with the child. When your families put some pressure on the subject, we say that there are billions of people in the world. What if I do, what if I don't? But 3 to 5 people no longer say this. Hundreds of millions of people, including my age group, now say this. And although this event sounds fantastic now, it may even bring the future of humanity to the level of species that will become extinct in 100 years. So what happened to us? Is this a natural flow? Is it a result of the capital system and technology? Or are there some much darker secret hands behind the work? There is only one common answer to all of these questions. Yes, and today we will investigate this together. Welcome to Find the Truth. We are in the Roman Empire in the 2nd century AD. My friend, the subject is the present day. If there are those who say, where did ancient Rome come from? It means that they have not watched my previous videos. History consists only of cycles, friends. It never changes. In fact, for the first time in our human history, it is about to change in some way. But we will get to that next week, so we need to know how the previous one ended in order to understand the current main cycle. The mighty Roman Empire seems to be at the peak of its glory, a gigantic power controlling the entire perimeter of the Mediterranean Sea. But what Rome doesn't realize is that this glory is slowly bringing its end. As the empire grew, people began to gather in cities such as Rome, where job opportunities were plentiful, and this naturally caused a congestion of living space. Of course, for the normal people, especially the working class, the rich are always in good spirits. This does not change much in history, with the effect of various diseases such as the plague of Antonius and conflicts on the borders. Basic food production in the countryside decreases, and with it an inflation crisis erupts. As a result, the lower class living in the city begins to have less access to basic needs. Not only that, due to the endless wars, decrease in production and deaths due to epidemics, the tax revenues of the empire also begin to decrease, and serious tax increases begin to be made in order to suspend this, which causes the people who are already crushed by inflation to be even more miserable, of course. In the meantime, emperors and nobles who are unaware of the people are enjoying their days. There may have started to be those who think that I am really exaggerating this story because I am telling you the exact situation of the situation in Turkey right now. But really, I am neither exaggerating nor trying to make it look similar. The events that happened are mentioned in the books in this way, and we are now wandering on the borders of the end that happened to the novel to happen to us. History is unfortunately repeating itself. Let's go back to Rome. This pressure on the people triggers an interesting reaction, and the childbearing rates of the Romans suddenly begin to plummet. Look, we are talking about the times before the Industrial Revolution. There are no machines. The main constructive power is manpower. Understand the seriousness of the situation. The empire tries to stop the labor force gap created by the Romans, who stopped reproducing due to financial and life difficulties, by attracting immigrants from outside. And therefore, while the population connected to the values and ideals of Rome decreases, the money-oriented population increases and the demographic structure deteriorates. And eventually the exploited become exploiters and play a major role in the eventual collapse and looting of Rome. And yes, I am still not exaggerating. These things happened in Rome, they happened in Sumer, and they are about to happen again. Remember the cycles. Rome collapses, the feudal, decentralized structure envelops Europe. The Dark Ages begin, people die again as a result of epidemics and mismanagement. The feudal structure collapses, the central authority is reestablished, and we welcome today's world. The centralized system structure is still a form of government that continues today, but now states have to grow continuously as in those times, and they do not have to fight with their neighbors for this. Although there are still wars in the world, we are experiencing the most stable periods in history in general. I wish this would last forever in every corner of the world, and I am sure it will begin to last one day. But these stable and beautiful periods begin to bring about a different, unexpected problem. For the first time in human history, so many old people have started to accumulate in societies, and this was the most destructive weapon for states. After working for years and contributing to your country in some way, your most basic right is, of course, to retire and enjoy life. But this basic human right has turned into an existential problem for states. The reason is that people live longer with the developing technology and the decrease in birth rates. We are used to our families turning 80 years old today. But for example, do you know how many years the average human lifespan of 80 was in Rome, which I just gave an example? Only 30. Those who could pass 30 were considered lucky if they lived until 50, 55, of course. Once again, I'm talking about normal people. Otherwise, there is a minority living up to 70 to 80. But in general, lifespans were like this. Even in 18th century, the average life expectancy in Europe was 38 to 42 years. In the last 2 centuries, we have been able to double this figure thanks to technology and science, and it continues to increase continuously. But this has led to the following problem: the accumulation of retired people. In fact, this was not a problem until 50 years ago, since there were 10 young people joining the labor force for every 1 retired person. The amount of production and growth allowed the states to take care of those retirees and did not affect the economy. But do you know where this ratio will drop in 2035? Only 2.5 employees for every 1 retiree, and in 2050, 1 for every 1 retiree. Employees, in short, in the next 7 years, you will see that the pension system worldwide will begin to collapse, and possibly even the pension system will be closed, or a worse scenario will unfortunately be waiting for our elders. You know, the era of epidemics of uncertain origin. So what is happening? Why have young people become so technologically advanced while science is so advanced that they do not think about reproduction? In fact, the answer is very simple. This is not a technology-related issue. But what is happening in Rome almost 1800 years ago is happening now. That is, a global wave of inflation and a decline in purchasing power. By the way, technology does not reverse this. On the contrary, as technology develops, you do not have children even if you have money, so it has a catalyzing effect. I mentioned this issue in the Universe 25 experiment I did last week. As technology develops, as people are offered opportunities for a comfortable life, the goals of individuals are lost and they start to live a lazy and narcissistic life without getting involved in the meat and milk, so an empty society is formed, so to speak. On top of this, when the imbalance of purchasing power, global inflation, exchange rate difference problems, housing problems come on top of this, people started to give up having children in order to secure their own lives. And this is exactly the reason for the dramatic decline in the reproduction rate in developed and developing countries. I like to tell you things like a conversation, but all of these are actually scientific data. For example, I want to give a few examples. In order for the population to age in a balanced way and to ensure the cycle of young people replacing them, each family on average should have 2 children, even taking into account the increasing human age. Having 3 children will ensure the future of the country. When this figure falls below 1.5, you see that the average population is aging at a dramatic rate. Look, there is no need for war, atomic bombs, etc. If you have an enemy below 0.5, sit back and watch live how the country's economy, infrastructure, production, and population are destroyed step by step every year. It is that effective. Or not so much, after all. There are 8.4 billion people in the world, and if you say that it is constantly increasing, I would like to give a few painful examples. In South Korea, which seems to be a land of kindness and technology that fascinates women with its TV series, the reproduction rate has dropped to 0. This means that in the next 100 years, if there are currently 100 young people in South Korea, the number of young people will decrease to 4, which means that the remaining 96 people will be old or aging people. In short, if Korea does not stop this trend, it will disappear after 100 years. At least the mass called Korean will disappear. Korea is followed by China and Singapore with a rate of 1.1, Italy and Spain with a rate of 1.2, and Japan with a rate of 1.3, while in Turkey this rate is 1.5. We are not aware of this now, or we do not care. But if these rates do not change in 100 years, which they are now tending to fall more rapidly, The world will change completely, and it will change in an incredible way. Thousands of years-old states, countries, old friends, enemies, etc., will all disappear. There will be no tangible Turks, no British, no French. Tragic funny, isn't it? Countries that have fought with each other throughout history to survive will disappear by looking at each other. Rapidly declining birth rates and disappearing young population due to economic and social conditions. Yes, as I just mentioned, we still have 100 years before the continuity of the human species is at risk, but problems for the healthy functioning of the system have already begun to occur. Just like in the Roman period, people are now concentrated in giant cities, and these giant ecosystems really need a lot of workers and laborers to work. Drivers for the bus system that transports millions of people, workers for garbage collection and cleaning, engineers and workers to maintain the sewers, which are the city's drainage system, and thousands of other subsystems always require direct human power. But how will this system survive when that power is no longer available or too qualified to do these jobs? This is unfortunately an inevitable vicious circle that every civilization faces, according to scientific data, as a country modernizes, as its technology develops, and especially as the level of education increases. There is a decrease in the number of people who want to do things that are seen as less qualified jobs in society. A person who has studied engineering for 4 years does not want to carry iron in construction, or an economics graduate does not want to drive a bus. Of course, everyone's personal preference. But when the population is highly specialized, this time there are no people to work in those lifelines necessary for the cities and the system to work. And for this reason, the system collapses its own gangrene. The developed country closes this gap by attracting young people from countries with a high reproduction rate that are 2 or 3 steps less developed than itself. For example, one of the most well-known historical examples of this for our country is the labor purchase agreement signed by Turkey and Germany in 1961. For the rapidly growing industry of Germany, the labor force, which was abundant in Turkey, shifted to the more developed country. Years passed, Turkey developed. From time to time, we started to appoint our labor force from our less developed neighbors and to attract waves of migration. The UK drew it from India and Pakistan. The USA drew it from Mexico and other countries. This was almost a natural process until today. Now, an abnormal shortage of intermediate staff and labor force has exploded worldwide due to both decreasing youth, growing countries, and the fact that many countries have exceeded a certain level of education. And on top of this, things got out of hand when people in poor countries migrated in huge masses, either fleeing war, escaping climatic problems, or hoping for a better life. Of course, there is also a version of this for different reasons, Ataturk warned us in the address to the youth. But let's not get into the conspiracy part of the work. This giant refugee movement is not only in Turkey, but literally all over the world. For example, there are about 15 million refugees or immigrants known in Europe. There are about 4 million in Turkey, of course. Since these figures are official, it is not difficult to understand that the reality is 2 to 2. It is not difficult to understand that the realities are 2 to 2, 5 times more than this. It is enough to even walk around the streets. This modern migration of tribes puts an excessive burden on the already shaken systems, bringing with it a jump in inflation, a housing crisis, and an increase in crime rates. In other words, the migrant system, which has been flowing in a controlled manner to support the decreasing labor force for thousands of years, is now flowing towards developed societies like a burst dam. If you really want to do this, you will have to get your hands seriously dirty. But even if you do this, after a generation, with these low birth rates, you will need even more immigrants than before. And what will happen then? Can you tell? It is a double-edged sword, and at the end of this path, there will be no nation-state in the world, because the individuals of that nation will have already mixed with other nations and decreased without even dropping a single bomb. Goodbye, multinational world structure. Welcome, homogeneous, mixed national world states and New World Order. As I said, this was the second video of a 3-step series, and step by step, we finally came to the final summit. Next week, you will see where both the collapsing social structure in the universe 25 experiment and the changing social structure you see in today's video will lead how this has been planned for years and the dynamics behind this plan. That video will be a little more shocking than these, but I believe it will help you complete the puzzle in your head. See you in the last video of the series next week. Take care of yourself.